Ryder Hawk had seen his fair share of strange worlds, but nothing could have prepared him for the planet that had just become his prison. It wasn't on any map, and when his ship broke down in the middle of nowhere, he had no choice but to land and figure out what to do next. The planet's surface was barren, with jagged rocks stretching across the horizon, and the air felt too thin, making it harder to breathe than usual. Ryder was a deep space explorer, used to navigating through harsh conditions, but even he couldn't deny the unease that crept up his spine as he surveyed his surroundings. After a quick assessment, he realized his ship was beyond repair. The engines had completely burned out, and with no communication systems working, he was stranded. That was when he first saw her. Out of the corner of his eye, a glint of movement caught his attention. He spun around, reaching for his blaster, but froze when he saw her standing there. She wasn't human, far from it. She was tall, with skin like liquid silver that seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and her eyes, oh, her eyes, glowed with an eerie blue light, like twin moons burning in the night sky. The way she moved was graceful, almost predatory, with a confidence that spoke of power. Her hair was dark, flowing like a river of night, and her fangs, sharp and gleaming, peeked out from beneath her full lips. For a moment, Ryder wondered if he was hallucinating from the altitude. But no, this woman was real, and she was far from friendly. Ryder instinctively raised his blaster, but the woman didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, though it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was the kind of smile you'd expect from a predator, sizing up its prey. "You're not going anywhere, human," she said, her voice low and melodic, but with an undeniable edge of authority. Ryder's grip on his weapon tightened, but he found himself unable to take his eyes off her. She wasn't just beautiful, she was dangerous. "Who are you?" Ryder demanded, his voice steady despite the growing fear he felt. The woman took a step closer, her presence like a force pushing against him. "I am Ziranith of the Vorlaxian Empire," she said, her words dripping with power. "And you, Ryder Hawk, are mine now." Ryder's mind raced. How did she know his name? And what was a Vorlaxian? He had heard rumors of alien species beyond the galaxy, but he'd never encountered one up close. His heart pounded in his chest, but his military training kept him focused. "I don't belong to anyone," he said, his voice hard. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not sticking around to find out." Ziranith's lips curled into a smile that sent a shiver down Ryder's spine. "You'll soon learn, Ryder," she said softly, "that I don't give you a choice." Before he could react, she raised her hand, and a strange sensation washed over him. It was like an invisible force was pressing on him, making it hard to breathe, to move. His vision blurred for a moment, and then, with a sudden snap, everything cleared. He stumbled back, feeling lightheaded, and before he could regain his bearings, Ziranith was standing directly in front of him. "You're not going anywhere," she repeated, her voice colder this time. Ryder's pulse raced. The danger was real, and he had no idea how to escape her grip. The woman, no, the creature, was far more than he could handle, and the last thought that crossed his mind was that this might be the end of his journey. Ryder was still reeling from the shock of Ziranith's sudden power when she led him through the barren landscape. The planet's air felt colder, heavier with every step, and Ryder found himself struggling to keep up. Ziranith moved effortlessly, her silver skin shimmering under the dim light of the twin moons. Her beauty was mesmerizing, but Ryder couldn't shake the fear that wrapped around him like a thick fog. He had never felt so powerless in all his years of exploring deep space. "Where are we going?" Ryder asked, trying to keep his voice steady. His mind raced, looking for any possible escape route, but he could already tell that Ziranith was no ordinary alien. She was something far more dangerous, far more mysterious. Ziranith glanced back over her shoulder, her glowing eyes locking with his. "To the place where you'll understand," she replied cryptically, her voice calm yet commanding. Her words didn't make sense to Ryder, but there was no arguing with the way she moved. the way her presence seemed to fill the air. He couldn't escape, not without risking a violent confrontation he wasn't sure he could survive. He reluctantly followed her, trying to remain alert, but his exhaustion was beginning to wear him down. After what felt like hours of walking through the desolate landscape, they reached a hidden cave nestled between two towering cliffs. The entrance was narrow, almost impossible to see unless you were right on top of it. Zaranith slipped inside without hesitation, her body disappearing into the darkness like she belonged there. Ryder hesitated for a moment before following her in. The air inside the cave was warm, almost humid, and the sound of water dripping echoed in the silence. It was an eerie place, with shadows dancing on the walls and strange markings carved into the stone. Zaranith led him deeper into the cave, where the walls began to glow with a faint blue light. Ryder's heart skipped a beat when he realized the light was coming from the walls themselves, almost like the cave was alive. "Where are we?" Ryder asked, his voice barely a whisper. He had no idea what was going on, but his instincts were screaming at him to be cautious. Zaranith didn't answer immediately, but when she did, her voice was soft, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "This is the heart of the Vorlaxian Empire," she said, her words filled with both pride and sorrow. "This is where it all began, where my people learned to bind with humans like you." Ryder's confusion deepened. Bind with humans? What was she talking about? "What do you mean, bind?" he asked, his curiosity taking over. Zaranith finally turned to face him, her glowing eyes locked onto his. "The bond between our species," she said, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "We Vorlaxians, we drink the blood of humans, but it's not just for sustenance. We bind ourselves to you, sharing our powers, our knowledge, our very essence." Ryder felt his pulse quicken. "What?" he breathed, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. She wasn't just talking about some strange alien ritual. She was talking about something far more personal. Zaranith stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "I've been searching for you, Riderhawk," she said softly. "You have the potential to be more than just a human. You have the power to understand us, to bond with us in ways no one else can." Ryder's eyes widened, the weight of her words sinking in. She was saying that he was different, that somehow he was the key to something greater. His mind raced, questions swirling like a storm, but one thing was clear: Zaranith wasn't lying. There was something in her eyes, something in the way she spoke, that made Ryder realize he wasn't just her prisoner. He was something more, something that could change the course of her entire species. And that thought scared him more than anything he had ever faced before. Ryder couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. The walls of the cave, now glowing eerily in the dim light, seemed to close in around him. And Zaranith's words echoed in his mind. "You have the potential to understand us." But Ryder wasn't sure what that meant. He was just a human, and everything about the Vorlaxians, everything about Zaranith, was foreign and terrifying. He wanted to escape, but his instincts told him that any attempt to run would be futile. He couldn't match her strength. She'd shown him that already. So he tried something else. He tried to reason with her. "I don't understand," Ryder said, his voice tense but firm. "Why me? Why do you need a human like me? I'm just one man, alone, stranded on this planet. I'm not special." Zaranith's expression softened, but there was a strange intensity in her gaze. "You're wrong, Riderhawk," she said, her voice calm but piercing. "You've always been special. Your bloodline carries a power that no one, not even the Vorlaxians, fully understand. We've been searching for you, for centuries." Ryder felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Centuries," he repeated, disbelieving. "How can that be? I've never heard of anything like this." Zaranith took a step closer, her silver skin shimmering in the cave's unnatural light. "You wouldn't know, human. The history of your kind and mine has been buried, hidden away by those who feared what would happen if our worlds ever crossed. But we've been watching, waiting. And now, you're here. The bond is ready to be forged. Ryder backed up a step, shaking his head. I don't want any part of this. I don't know what you think I can do, but I'm not interested. I don't want to be bound to you or your people. He had never felt so vulnerable, but his defiance was all he had left. He couldn't know, he wouldn't accept being part of some strange, alien ritual. Zyranith's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ryder feared she might lash out. But instead, she simply sighed, a soft sound that was almost human. I never said you had a choice, she said quietly. The bond cannot be forced. It must be offered freely, and it will change you. But understand this, if you refuse, it will only cause more harm than good. The Vorlaxians are not a peaceful people, Ryder. We are warriors, hunters. If you resist, we will find a way to take what we need. But if you accept, you will have power beyond anything you've ever dreamed. You will be stronger than any human, and you will understand our ways. Together, we can create something new, something better. Ryder's heart pounded. He wanted to say no, wanted to refuse and fight back, but there was something about Zyranith's words that lingered in his mind. She wasn't threatening him. She wasn't just trying to manipulate him. It was as if she genuinely believed what she was saying. Ryder took a deep breath, trying to clear his head. And if I agree? He asked, his voice low. What happens then? Zyranith's expression softened once again, and this time there was a hint of something deeper in her eyes, a flicker of something almost like hope. Then we will unlock your true potential, she said softly, and together we will change everything. You will help me lead my people into a new age, an age where we are not just conquerors, but creators. You have the power to help us build a future. Ryder stood there, caught in the weight of her words. Part of him wanted to run, to fight back, but another part of him, a part he couldn't quite explain, felt the pull of her offer. It was a dangerous game, a game that could change everything. And in that moment, Ryder Hawk knew that his life was no longer his own. The bond was coming, whether he liked it or not. But as he looked into Zyranith's glowing eyes, he couldn't help but wonder, what would it mean to accept? Ryder's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one crashing into the next. He couldn't shake Zyranith's words, the promise of power, the offer of something beyond his understanding. But a deep part of him still resisted. He didn't know what this bond would truly mean, what kind of person it would make him. But one thing was clear. Accepting meant giving up everything he knew. He wasn't ready for that. Not yet. He tried to focus on what he could control, pushing aside the unsettling pull of her words. Why can't I just leave? Ryder asked, his voice tight with frustration. He had tried to escape earlier, but he knew better now than to try running. There was no getting away from Zyranith, no escaping the future she seemed to be offering him, whether he wanted it or not. Zyranith's expression was unreadable, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly as she regarded him. You can't leave, Ryder, she said softly, almost gently, but there was a firmness beneath her words. The bond is already starting. You can feel it, can't you? The changes inside you. You've begun to understand, even if you don't realize it yet. Ryder stiffened. He hadn't been able to ignore the strange sensations that had been building inside him since the moment she'd first touched him. At first, it had been subtle, a tingling sensation in his fingers, an odd sharpness in his vision. But as time passed, those sensations had become stronger, more intense. His senses were heightened, and sometimes, just for a moment, he felt like he could hear the faintest whispers of thoughts that weren't his own. He didn't know if it was the bond or his mind playing tricks on him, but whatever it was, it scared him. I don't want to be part of whatever this is, he said, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain calm. I don't want any part of your empire or your people. Zyranith studied him for a long moment, her silver eyes unwavering. Then she sighed and took a slow step toward him. Her presence seemed to fill the space between them, as if the air itself shifted when she was near. I never asked you to join our empire, Ryder. I'm not asking you to follow me, not yet. But I am asking you to accept what's already happening. You are changing, whether you want it or not. The bond has begun, and soon, you'll see things differently." She paused, as though weighing her words carefully before continuing. "I cannot force you, Ryder. The decision is yours. But know this: rejecting the bond will only bring pain. The bond exists for a reason, and rejecting it means rejecting who you are becoming." Ryder felt a chill settle over him. She spoke with such certainty, as though she had seen this happen countless times before. Her words seemed to wrap around him like chains, pulling him closer to her people, to this strange destiny he wasn't sure he wanted. "And what exactly am I becoming?" Ryder asked, his voice quieter now, the defiance beginning to fade. "What do you want from me?" Zaranith's gaze softened just slightly, and for a moment, Ryder could have sworn there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. A sadness, maybe, or perhaps something deeper. "What I want is not as important as what you can become," she said, her voice almost gentle. "I am not the one who decides. You will shape what the bond means. You will unlock the power that lies dormant within you, a power that only a human with your bloodline can wield. And when you do, you will see the galaxy in ways no one else ever will." Her words lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ryder tried to push them out of his mind, but they clung to him, and he could feel the truth in them, like a pulse beating under his skin. He wasn't just any human. He had something inside him, something that made him special, and Zaranith knew it. It was the reason she had sought him out, the reason she wouldn't let him go. And the more he thought about it, the more Ryder realized that there was no going back. Whatever happened next, he couldn't change the course he was on. The bond was already starting to take hold, and whether he liked it or not, he was about to find out what it truly meant. The next few days passed in a blur for Ryder. Despite his growing unease, he had no choice but to stay close to Zaranith. She seemed to know what he needed before he even asked. She provided him with food and water, but always under her watchful eye. No matter how hard Ryder tried to resist, there was an undeniable pull, a force he couldn't explain. It was as if his body was betraying him, reacting to her presence in ways he couldn't control. His senses were sharper, more alive than ever before. His skin tingled whenever she was near, and every sound in the cave seemed to echo louder, sharper. His strength was growing too, though he didn't know why or how. It was as if something deep inside him was awakening, something alien that didn't belong. Zaranith, ever patient, watched him with quiet amusement, though her face always held a trace of something else, something serious. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked one evening as they sat near a flickering fire inside the cave. Ryder didn't look at her. He wasn't ready to admit how much he had changed, how much the bond had already started to take root inside him. The urge to run, to escape, was still there, but it was weaker now. "Feel what?" he asked, his voice tinged with bitterness. Zaranith's glowing eyes studied him, her silver skin reflecting the firelight like liquid mercury. "The power," she said softly. "The power that is awakening inside of you. You've begun to see through the veil. Ryder, the world around you is no longer the same. You're starting to understand things that you couldn't before." Ryder shook his head, trying to ignore the way her words resonated with his mind. He didn't want to accept what was happening to him, but there was no denying it. He could see the smallest details more clearly now. He could hear the faintest rustling of the leaves outside the cave, the softest whispers in the air. His vision was sharper than it had ever been, and his body was stronger, faster, more attuned to the world around him. "I don't want this," Ryder muttered, but his voice lacked the conviction it once had. There was a part of him, buried deep inside, that was starting to crave the power Zaranith had promised. He couldn't stop it, and that terrified him. "You don't have to want it," Zaranith replied, her voice low and soothing. The bond doesn't ask for permission. It simply is. And once it takes root, you will see the world in a way you never could before. Your mind will expand. Your senses will sharpen. You will be more than human. Ryder stood abruptly, shaking his head as if he could somehow shake off her words. I didn't ask for any of this. I just want to get back to my ship, fix it, and leave. Zira-Nith's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. Your ship is beyond repair, she said calmly. And even if it weren't, you wouldn't be able to leave, Ryder. Not anymore. Her words hit him like a physical blow, and Ryder felt his stomach twist with frustration and fear. He couldn't leave. The truth was, he didn't know if he even wanted to anymore. The power inside him was calling to him, pulling him toward something bigger than himself, something he couldn't understand. But it was there, and it was real. He could feel it. Zira-Nith stood and walked toward him, her steps soundless on the cave floor. The bond is inevitable. You can fight it, but it will only make you suffer, she said softly, her voice like a whisper of silk. Embrace it, and you will become something far greater than you ever imagined. We can change the galaxy together, Ryder. You and I. Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of destiny. Ryder looked at her, his chest tightening with a mixture of fear and curiosity. There was no escaping this. Whatever the bond was, it had already begun, and he was in it now, whether he liked it or not. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Zira-Nith wasn't just offering him power. She was offering him a chance to change everything. The question was, could he trust her? And if he couldn't, what would that mean for him? And for the future she was promising. Ryder couldn't deny that something inside him was changing. Every day, it became harder to ignore the pull of the bond that Zira-Nith had warned him about. The power was inside him now, creeping through his veins like wildfire. The strange, sharp sensations he'd been feeling were no longer fleeting. They were constant. His senses were heightened in ways he couldn't explain, and every move he made felt different, faster, stronger. His mind seemed to race ahead, anticipating things before they even happened. But it was more than that. There was a new understanding that came with it, a feeling that he could see the world in a way he never had before. He could see the cracks in the cave walls, the tiniest movements of creatures in the shadows. He could hear the distant hum of energy coursing through the planet. And when he looked at Zira-Nith, it was as if he could read her thoughts, feel the pull of her emotions as if they were his own. But that power came at a cost. Ryder still resisted it, tried to fight against the changes taking place inside him. He didn't want to lose who he was. He didn't want to become like Zira-Nith or her people, trapped in a world of alien power and strange customs. Yet every time he tried to pull away, the bond only seemed to grow stronger, more insistent. One evening, as they sat by the fire inside the cave, Ryder finally broke the silence. "Why don't you just tell me everything?" he asked, his voice quiet but intense. "Why do I have to go through this? Why not just force me to accept the bond completely?" Zira-Nith's eyes flickered with something, amusement, perhaps, but there was also a depth to her gaze that suggested she understood his struggle better than he did. She tilted her head slightly, watching him with an almost sad smile. "Because, Ryder," she said slowly, "the bond must be offered freely. It cannot be forced. The power you're experiencing is a reflection of that freedom. The moment you stop fighting it, the moment you stop resisting, it will come to you fully. And when it does, you will be more than just a human. You will be something new, something that will change the galaxy." Her voice was soft, but filled with certainty, and Ryder couldn't help but feel the truth of her words deep in his bones. He didn't want to admit it, but part of him wanted that power, wanted to be something more than human. It was hard to ignore the temptation, hard to push away the thought of what he could accomplish with such strength. But then, another thought gnawed at him, the thought of what would happen to him if he fully embraced the bond. What would he become? Would he lose himself entirely, becoming nothing more than a tool for Zira-Nith and her people? Or would he retain control, using the power to shape his own future. It was a question that haunted him, and he wasn't sure if he wanted the answer. Zaranith seemed to sense his hesitation. She reached out, her hand hovering just inches from his. Her touch was warm, gentle, but Ryder could feel the power radiating off her. "You fear what you don't understand," she said softly. "That's natural. But you must trust that you are ready. The bond will not break you. It will only make you stronger, more attuned to the universe, more connected to everything around you." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "But you must choose, Ryder. You can continue to fight the bond, and you will remain stuck in a world that no longer suits you, or you can embrace it, and you will find your true purpose." Ryder looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. And for the first time, he wondered if there was more to this than just survival. What if this was his chance to change everything? To become someone who could shape his own destiny? What if he could do more than just escape? "Is it worth it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Is the power really worth all the risks?" Zaranith's expression softened, her eyes glowing brighter in the firelight. "That, Ryder, is a question only you can answer." Ryder's mind raced as he lay in the darkened cave, staring at the ceiling. The soft flicker of the fire was the only light, casting shadows that danced along the walls. His thoughts were tangled, spinning in circles that seemed to lead nowhere. Zaranith's words echoed in his ears. "You must choose." The power, the bond, everything was happening so quickly, and Ryder wasn't sure if he was ready for it. Could he really embrace this alien force inside him? Could he become something more than human and still keep his soul intact? The more Ryder thought about it, the harder it became to ignore the truth. He was changing. There was no going back. It was as if the universe itself had chosen him, chosen his bloodline to carry this power. He felt it in his bones, deep down, like a pulse that was just beginning to quicken. It made him stronger, faster, more aware of the world around him. And every time Zaranith touched him or spoke to him, that connection seemed to grow. There were moments when Ryder thought he could even hear her thoughts, feel her emotions. It was as if she was becoming a part of him, and he was becoming a part of her. Ryder sat up, his hands trembling slightly. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as if the cave itself was pressing against him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly. The power was inside him, crawling under his skin, and there was no escaping it. He had tried to push it away, tried to fight it, but it only got stronger, and Zaranith was always there, watching him with those glowing eyes, waiting for him to make his choice. He looked over at her now. She was sitting on the other side of the fire, her silvery skin reflecting the flames as her eyes stayed fixed on him. She didn't say anything, but Ryder could feel the weight of her gaze, the pressure of her expectations. It was as if she was silently urging him to decide. "You keep saying I have a choice," Ryder muttered, his voice raw. "But it doesn't feel like a choice anymore. It feels like I don't have any control, like everything is already happening to me." Zaranith's gaze softened, and she moved closer to him, her presence filling the air between them. "The bond is a part of you, Ryder," she said quietly. "It always has been. You were chosen because your bloodline holds the potential to unlock something great. But the power is not the only thing that awaits you. It is the understanding of the universe, the ability to see and feel things that others cannot. It's not just about strength. It's about connection, unity." Ryder's chest tightened at her words. He had never felt so alone and so overwhelmed at the same time. The idea of connecting with Zaranith, of merging their fates, terrified him. What would that make him? Who would he be after all of this? He wasn't sure he wanted to find out. "I don't want to lose myself," he said, almost pleading. "I don't want to forget who I am." "You won't," Zaranith said, her voice gentle but firm. "You will become more than you are. But you will never lose yourself. You will see the truth, Ryder. You will understand your place in this universe." Her words hung in the air like a promise, But Ryder wasn't sure if he could trust them. What if the power did take over? What if it changed him into someone he couldn't recognize? He closed his eyes, trying to push away the thoughts that were flooding his mind. He didn't want to give in, but he didn't know how much longer he could resist. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to embrace the power, to accept the bond. But part of him was terrified of what might come next. Ryder stood up abruptly, pacing the small space of the cave. What if I don't want any of this? What if I just want to leave, to go back to my life? Zyranith's voice was calm, almost soothing. You cannot go back, Ryder. Not now. The universe has already begun to change, and you are part of that change. You are part of something bigger than yourself. The weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. Ryder paused, his heart pounding in his chest. Could he really walk away from all of this? Could he really go back to a normal life? Or was he meant to stay here, with Zyranith, and embrace the bond that was already taking root inside him? He didn't know the answer, but he felt the truth of it deep within him. The bond was his destiny, and soon there would be no turning back. Ryder could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him more than ever. Each passing day, the pull of the bond seemed to grow stronger, wrapping around him like invisible chains. He could no longer ignore it, no longer pretend that he could just walk away. The power was inside him now, a constant reminder of what Zyranith had told him. His senses were sharper, his reflexes faster. His thoughts were clearer, but that clarity came with a price. The more he understood about the power inside him, the more he feared losing himself. He wasn't sure if it was the bond or just his own doubts, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Could he trust Zyranith? Could he trust this strange power that was now a part of him? One evening, as the stars outside the cave glittered like tiny diamonds in the vast, empty sky, Ryder sat silently by the fire. He could feel the heat of the flames on his skin, but it didn't warm him. Inside, he felt cold, as though a part of him was already being lost. He looked at Zyranith, who was seated nearby, her eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. She was always calm, always composed, but Ryder couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for him to make a choice. She had given him time, allowed him to wrestle with his thoughts, but he knew she wouldn't wait forever. What happens if I don't accept the bond? Ryder asked quietly, his voice betraying the fear he was trying to hide. Zyranith looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she didn't speak, as if choosing her words carefully. The bond is not something that can be denied forever, she said softly. If you reject it completely, it will only bring pain. Your body, your mind will fight against it, and in the end, it will destroy you. But if you accept it, if you allow the power to fully take root, you will be changed. You will see the galaxy with new eyes, understand it in ways no human has ever understood before. Ryder's heart raced at her words. He didn't want to believe her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. He had already started changing, already felt the power shifting inside him. The question was, what would it turn him into? He wasn't sure if he was ready to become something so different, so far removed from who he used to be. He didn't know if he wanted to become like Zyranith, a part of this alien world that he didn't understand. What do you want from me, Zyranith? Ryder asked, his voice strained with frustration. Why are you doing this? Why can't you just leave me alone? Zyranith's gaze softened, and she stood up slowly, walking over to him. Her steps were silent, but Ryder could feel the presence of her power as she drew closer. I don't want to force you, Ryder, she said, her voice low and steady. I never have. But the power inside you, the bond, it is part of who you are. It's always been there, even before we met. I can help you unlock it, show you how to use it, but it is up to you whether you accept or not. I cannot make that decision for you. Ryder's mind spun. Could he really accept this? Could he embrace the power, the bond, and everything it meant? Or was he simply being swept along by forces beyond his control? He could feel the weight of Zyranith's words, But the fear inside him was still there, gnawing at his every thought. What would it mean to accept this bond completely? Would he still be himself, or would he become something else, something alien? "Ryder," Zyranith said, her voice a soft whisper, as if sensing his doubts. "You don't have to fear what you're becoming. The bond will change you, yes, but it will not take away who you are. You are still you, Ryder. You will always be you. The only difference is, you will be more. You will be able to see the universe in ways no one else can. You will be able to understand it, shape it. Together, we can change everything." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ryder felt his heart pounding in his chest, the decision tearing at him. He could feel the power inside him, the undeniable call of the bond. It was tempting, so tempting, to embrace it fully and see where it would take him. But the fear remained. Could he truly trust Zyranith? Could he trust himself? He stood up slowly, his gaze fixed on the stars outside the cave. He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever decision he made, it would change everything. Ryder stood at the edge of the cave, staring out at the vast expanse of stars that stretched endlessly above him. The decision was upon him now, more urgent than ever. Every part of him wanted to reach for the power Zyranith had offered, to accept the bond and become something more. But the fear still lingered in the back of his mind. What would he lose in the process? Could he really trust himself to remain human, to stay true to who he was, if he gave in to this power? Behind him, Zyranith's presence was a constant, like a force that neither pressed him forward nor held him back, simply waiting. Ryder could feel her eyes on him, could sense the weight of her gaze on his back, but this time he didn't turn to meet it. He had to make this decision on his own. He had to face the future with or without the power, and only he could decide how he would face it. He took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. For a moment, everything was silent. The crackling of the fire behind him, the hum of the distant stars, the heartbeat of the planet beneath his feet. It all faded away, leaving only the sound of his own thoughts. He knew the bond was more than just an offer from Zyranith. It was part of him now, as much a part of his being as his own heartbeat. He couldn't deny it any longer. The power was already inside him, waiting for him to claim it. But could he control it? Could he truly wield it without losing himself? These were the questions that had haunted him for days. He thought about the way the power had made him feel, stronger, faster, more aware of everything around him. He'd felt like a new person, as though a veil had been lifted from his eyes. But he didn't want to be just another tool, another pawn in some grand scheme he didn't fully understand. He needed to know if he could control the power and use it on his terms, not be ruled by it. "Zyra," he called out, his voice breaking the silence. She stepped forward, her silver skin glowing faintly in the dim light of the cave. She said nothing, only waited, giving him the space to make his choice. Ryder turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. "I've been afraid," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "Afraid of losing myself, of losing control. But I think I'm ready now. I'm ready to take the power." Zyranith's expression softened, and for the first time, Ryder saw something other than the calm, controlled leader in her eyes. There was something warmer there, something almost proud. "You don't have to be afraid, Ryder. You are ready. You've always been ready. The power will not change you unless you let it. You are the one who will shape it, not the other way around." Ryder took another deep breath, his mind finally at ease. He could feel the bond within him, pulling at the edges of his consciousness, ready to flood him with its strength. But this time, he wasn't afraid. This time, he was ready to embrace it, to see where it could take him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. He would shape it himself, not let it shape him. He closed his eyes and reached out, allowing the power to flow into him completely. It wasn't a sudden rush, but a steady current that filled every part of him, merging with his very being. Ryder felt stronger, sharper, more connected to the universe than ever before. It was as though he could see the very threads of fate, the delicate web that held the universe together, and he could feel his place within it. When he opened his eyes again, Zeranith was standing before him, her expression a mixture of approval and something deeper, something she hadn't shown him before. "You have made the right choice, Ryder," she said, her voice gentle yet filled with power. "Now, together, we will shake the future of this galaxy." Ryder looked up at the stars, feeling the power inside him hum with energy. For the first time since he had crash-landed on this strange planet, he felt at peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was no longer alone. He had Zeranith by his side, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The bond between them was strong, unbreakable, and Ryder was ready to face whatever came next, no matter how uncertain it might be.